Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you are well today. Today we're going to be discussing INFJ versus INFP morality, but really, more specifically, we could be sort of broadening this to an FE versus FI morality. But I think that starting from the point of view of the opposition between INFJ and INFP is a good starting point. I also just I'm aware of the fact that my voice is a little husky today because I was out last night with a friend, but otherwise all is good. Also, keep in mind that I have written two books: my book on the INFJ, the Ecstatic Soul, and my book on, well, The Infinite Castle, my novel. Both available down below at the links. Give them a chance, support my channel, support my Patreon page, also link down below. Always great to have supporters and a growing community. So these thoughts about the relationship between INFJ and INFP morality was spurred in part by an interview that I did recently with Joyce Meng. I think that interview, which is a kind of a short format video, so don't expect anything that is too substantial, but hopefully it will make for good shorts. Should be released in the next week or so, maybe the next 2 weeks. If you're interested, just check out Joyce's channel for this. As part of the discussions that we're having before and after actually recording the video, Joyce was asking me some very good questions about the differences between INFJ and INFP, and especially the relationship to morality that these two types have, because what we were discussing was the fact that at first sight we think that we have a way of distinguishing between the two moralities, but once we sort of start kind of digging down and analyzing those two stances down to their component parts, it turns out that if you're not careful, you might end up kind of defining each side almost according to the same criteria. So you would say, for example, in the case of an INFJ, well, an INFJ's moral stance is such that they might get upset if they don't see other people applying the same stance, okay? And we would say about an INFP, well, they get upset by other people if they see that other people are not respecting their stance, right? So in the one case, we have upset that other people are not applying their moral stance, and the other case, upset for the INFP, with upset that people are not respecting their moral values or their moral stance. So maybe we can sort of stay at the level of values because it makes the sort of discourse a little bit clearer than talking about a moral stance. So what's the difference? It sounds very similar on paper, and so I think that that's what I want to discuss in this video, is the fact that there's actually a very important difference. The morality of an INFJ is universalistic in character. So that doesn't necessarily mean that an INFJ will devise a moral system which will have universal application, for the simple reason that creating a moral system is a privilege that not a lot of people, never mind INFJs, ever get to achieve. But in a sort of unconscious or sort of maybe subconscious way, INFJs operate with a system of values that they relate to and make sense of those values by assuming, as part of the very definition of those values, that they're universally shared. So when an INFJ is examining a particular value and trying to understand and figure out whether they they want to keep this value, they question this value, they want to get a better sense of this value, they'll tend to look at how it fits within a universal moral scheme. And one implication of this is that they will test it out, maybe not deliberately, maybe not explicitly, on other people to see if those other people can embrace those values as well, or either can embrace them or already embrace them and can show the INFJ that they are being embraced. But the way that an INFJ makes sense of a value is through the values belonging to a group, and extending the notion of the group to the largest kind of, to the sort of furthest limit. We reach the world as a whole, the universe as a whole, so we get to universal values. Similar for an ENFJ, by the way. Now, so they get upset, of course, if they find that there are people who refuse to hold these values. They get upset and they start questioning whether one person is being morally irresponsible, or if it is that they don't quite understand what the value is about. Or maybe it is the value itself that is actually not a universal value and therefore should not be maintained in that internal framework that the INFJ possesses, and the INFJ would actually be quite ready to remove it if it were to turn out this way. In the case of an INFP and an ENFP, again, we can extend to, across the introversion-extroversion divide. Situation is different. So we're not talking about being upset if other people don't embrace their values, which is, again, the INFJ thing is linked to the universality of values in the INFJ world. They get upset, that is the INFP or the ENFP, if other people impinge on their values, don't respect their values. So here we have a much more, in some sense, introverted relationship to the values. The FI users, they don't relate to their system of values by defining them as something that belongs to some, universally. That doesn't mean that they would not prefer maybe hanging out with people who have the same values as them, but they're quite confident in giving meaning in the values and in knowing that the values are justified by relating to those values solely internally and not by having to put them within the context of an external frame of reference. It's just that subjective feeling works like this as opposed to objective feeling. So a consequence of this is that an INFP or an ENFP will never try to impose their values on other people or expect that other people will hold the same values. Like I said, they will probably have a preference for people who hold similar values, but they will not, as a rule, seek to, proactively extend the sphere of that value possession, partly because it's not how they relate to the values. In the case of an INFJ, the very way that they can make sense of having values and having a justified values is to have them extended. Otherwise, the values have no ground, as it were. But then the INFP gets upset if someone comes to them and tells them, well, I don't think the value that you're holding is correct. You should not be holding this. Maybe they will not say this explicitly, that friend of theirs. Maybe they will say it indirectly. Maybe that will be an implication or consequence of something else that was said. But if that's the conclusion, INFP could get very upset. ENFP, other FI users could get very upset because it's someone external to them challenging what they themselves possess. It's very different. Whereas in the case of the INFJ is when they do the proactive thing themselves and find out that other people don't hold the values that they thought. The INFJ would be led to question first the other person, but then whether the values has meaning and justification, and be quite ready to remove some values and take other ones that are, that they can have confidence are universal. In case of an FI user, it's not this give and take of values, like this kind of interaction where you're like, okay, does this one make sense? For an FI user, it's something that happens a lot less often. There's a lot more rigidity over the values because they relate to the values they have very intimately. They just don't like when someone outside comes in and maybe gives a rational argument or whatever to question why the INFP themselves possess the values, not why the INFP is trying to spread those values around. They usually don't, but why they themselves possess it, because they relate to them in this very intimate fashion. So that's the main difference. And you can also sense that can also be why there's a huge potential for mutual growth in INFJ-INFP relationships, because the INFP can learn to appreciate the way that the INFJ handles moral stances and values, and the INFJ can also profit from the INFP's intimate understanding and meaning making within the internal domain of values, but also why it can be quite really hard, full of obstacles and hurdles, and why a lot of people actually think that INFP relationships are not ideal. Because, among other things, this question about the relationship to moral values is at the center and crystallizes a lot of the issues. Let me know if this was any, clear, despite my fatigue. And yeah, hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and I will see you next week. Take care, guys. Bye-bye. Don't forget my Patreon. Always looking for supporters, and thank you to my current supporters. Bye-bye.